Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to yet another version of Elevenses. It's the topical news, controversial views and biking tips show here, delivered by Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's 13th of May today, it's Wednesday, and it's a sort of overcast day at the moment here in London. What have we got for you over the course of the half hour? Well, we've got Belfast fireman has his bike stolen. Bikers Ignore Bank Holiday Lockdown Rules in Derbyshire. We'll be looking at what the new lockdown rules, how we can interpret them and how we perhaps should think about applying them. The EU have changed the requirements for the A2 motorcycle license test machine, which is important. And finally, not last but not least, I'll be looking at some simple braking exercises that probably not a bad idea to try out. It's always a good idea to stop before you start. Okay, so all right, stay tuned to the end of the show if you can. If you can't, don't forget you can catch up here later or over on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK, or you won't find it. If you've got comments, questions, anything you want to say, suggestions for another show, try using the comment stream, and I will respond at the end of the show when I go off live. And also, all feedback is always welcome. Right, okay, so on with the story. Well, the first story is another one of these really depressing ones about people taking advantage of our emergency services personnel while they're at work. A Belfast fireman working on the front line during the coronavirus pandemic returned to his station yesterday morning to discover that someone had removed his motorcycle. It's a red Panigale, 1299, and it was parked at the Springfield Road fire station on Saturday and was taken at some time over the between midnight and 7 o'clock on the Sunday morning. So he's trying to get the bike back, obviously, in one piece, and everybody's out appealing for the public to have a look out for it. Sinn Féin councillor Michael Donnelly said, men and women in the fire service are putting their lives on the line on a daily basis, and this is a tiny minority reward them. It's a disgrace, he says, and quite frankly, it's hard to disagree with him there. Meanwhile, back here in England, the local police reported that a growing minority of motorcycle riders were flaunting the lockdown rules over the bank holiday weekend and heading off to the Derbyshire Dales to do some riding. Derbyshire Roads Policing Unit tweeted about 3 separate incidents where they pulled riders over in the Matlock Bath area. One said that a father and son pair on 2 bikes refused to give details, personal details, until officers actually threatened to seize their bikes. Somebody else was pulled out for riding in a T-shirt, which is legal, but as they said, it's not a great idea on a day or a time when the NHS is under pressure. The riders, the father and son riders, were pulled up for dodgy registration, dodgy exhausts, and the smaller bike was missing its L plate. They got tickets, I should have mentioned. The third tweet that they posted up on their Twitter feed was that then they say they aren't the fun police, but they do feel that a growing minority of people are undoing all the good work previously done, and 2 bikes were also seized for license offences. So, okay, and which basically brings us into the next story. Don't forget you are watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. We'll be looking at how the lockdown rules might affect us in just a moment, but we'll finish off with a story about the EU and their relaxing rules on the A2 license category machines, and finally why you should think about improving your braking skills before you get too heavy with the throttle. Right, okay, so it's Wednesday morning, and it's pretty likely that a lot of riders will be looking at the reasonably fine weather across the country and thinking, let's go out for a ride because of the lockdown rules relaxation. What did Boris's statement on Monday, on Sunday rather, and then the government's attempt to tried to clear up the confusion actually mean for us? I mean, everybody has been left pretty confused. You only have to look at Matt Lucas's spoof video if you want Boris's announcement summed up accurately in 20 seconds. He's confused, I'm confused, a lot of people are confused. On the one hand, we're told we can ride or drive as far as we like to reach open spaces. On the other hand, we're being told that we should still restrict our travel to essential journeys. So let's just recap where we were. Under the previous rules, motorcycles could be used for essential journeys, and those would be going to work, doing voluntary work, buying, shopping, but non-essential journeys, i.e. going out for a ride, were not allowed, and riders were getting stopped and some were getting fined. Now, the relaxation of the rules has changed something, in England at least. And now what the announcement said is that citizens are able to drive to outdoor spaces irrespective of distance, as long as they respect social distancing when they get there. Well, what exactly does that mean? Because it's as clear as mud, isn't it? What's a ride to an outdoor space? Does that mean you can ride to the outdoor space and then continue riding around it? Or are you supposed to get off and take some other use for that outdoor space? Naturally, it hasn't taken long for the various industry blogs and rider groups, everybody from the Motorcycle Action Group to various Facebook organisations, have come up with mostly pretty liberal interpretations of this, where they assume that what it means is that as long as you adhere to social distancing restrictions, then it's fine to go riding on the bike anywhere you like, just so long as it's within the borders of England. For example, you can carry a pillion from your own household, but meeting other people is strictly limited to groups of 2. So that's either you and your pillion, or you meeting with one friend from another address on another bike, but you can't do both simultaneously. And social distancing guidelines must be followed. Now, that was from Motorcycle Action Group, who claim, I think that was from Motorcycle Action Group anyway, they claim to have received government advice. Now, I'm not actually convinced about that, because I've been updated by the Driving Instructors Association, of which I'm a member. Now, not surprisingly, when the Boris's statement was made on Sunday, they were inundated with inquiries from driver and rider trainers, basically saying, what does this new advice mean for us? The DIA immediately got onto the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency, the DVSA, and they are the people, as you almost certainly know, who oversee everything to do with standards with vehicles, and also the riding and driving tests as well. That's what they administer, basically. Now, Monday morning, or Monday lunchtime rather, I got an email from the DIA which said that the DVSA have internally discussed the government statement, but they're still waiting themselves for clarification from the government. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I still hadn't received the promised further update from DIA, which aimed to give all driving instructors some clearer information. Now, if the premier industry body for the driving instructors can't get into the DVSA's heads on this and get advice, then I have to be fairly certain that rider groups probably haven't done any better. So I suspect that all they've managed to do is get some civil servant or somebody on the phone who's just basically repeated what the government already told us, and they've just interpreted that as they see fit. I suspect the only clarification that they really got was that motorcycles are allowed out just as cars are, that riding is equivalent to driving. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong. We're all in a bit of an information vacuum here, and all that any of us can do is interpret the information as best we can. Now, the main point that the DIA made in their email on Monday was that they believe that the statement on Sunday and the further clarifications from the government on Monday in terms of returning to work are focused on industries like construction and manufacturing, where there is at least some chance of maintaining some social distancing. Fairly obviously, driver training in a car is not going to happen. Motorcycling and bike training generally is a little bit different. But anyway, what they're basically saying is that they reiterate that the government statements, which many of us on bikes seem to be downplaying, is that we are still in a state of lockdown. We are not released from lockdown. We're still following those social guidance guidelines. We're still should only be thinking in terms of essential journeys, going out to work, and this idea that we can take some recreation by driving or riding. This is not a wholesale return to normality. Now, what I hear people saying, of course, is that it lets you off the hook, and that because it says you can take some recreation on the bike, you can go off riding wherever you like. But the government advice, the official advice from the government, is still stay at home as much as you possibly can. So if you can explain how a recreational journey is also staying at home, then feel free to go ahead. In any case, you'll note that the advice in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland maintains the previous line. They are not going with the relaxation that has been put in place in England. Now, I wrote a short piece on Facebook, and the vast majority of people who responded and said that they would be going riding, they seem to assume that as long as they took the social distancing distances seriously and they took precautions like washing their hands and wearing gloves while handling petrol pumps, then they'd be fine. But what evidence do we actually have that social distancing works? Well, what we do know is that the lockdown has isolated people from each other. It's simply stopped the vast majority of people being in contact, full stop. And that does seem to have had an effect. But what about the idea of social distancing? Well, as far as I can see, the 2 meter distance was plucked pretty much out of the air, so to speak. Now, the virus itself, and I've been doing some research on the science as best I can. There's plenty of it out there. The virus itself appears to spread mainly by airborne transmission. Initially, it was feared that it would be transferred by touching surfaces. And whilst it's likely that the virus can be transmitted that way because it's been shown that it can survive for hours and even days on many different surfaces, it does seem that it's airborne transmission, which is the major means of transferring the virus from one person to another. So how effective is the 2 meter distancing? Well, previous studies have focused on sneezes and coughs, and what tends to happen here is that we fire out spray of fairly big droplets when we sneeze or when we cough. And because those droplets are fairly big, they fall to the ground fairly quickly. Now, studies that have been done have been used with cameras, basically, and you can see these particles falling to the ground. But there's never been any guarantee that 2 meters is a magic number which provides complete protection, because it's been known for a long time that sneezes can fire droplets a lot further than 2 meters. And there's another problem. The rapid spread of the pandemic, plus evidence that the disease is being spread by asymptomatic carriers, i.e. those who are not coughing and spluttering all over the place, suggests that smaller particles called aerosols are playing a much larger role in transmission than has really been accepted. Now, a study in Japan was carried out fairly recently, just in the last few days, and what they did, they used a very sensitive camera, very high resolution. What they found was that what they call micro droplets, which are less than 1/100 of a millimeter across, were not just produced by coughing and sneezing, but spread by ordinary talking and breathing. And they can go well beyond the 2 meter social distancing guideline. What they found, in fact, was that 20 minutes after somebody coughed in a room, those micro droplets, which are also produced, remember, by breathing and talking, were still floating in the air, and they were spread throughout the entire room. So the danger is that being in the same room as somebody and 2 meters away doesn't guarantee that you will not get an infection from one of these micro droplets. Now, there are all sorts of other questions, things called virus load, how many of the viruses are actually packed into whatever it is you've just inhaled. It certainly seems that the more viruses you inhale, the more likely you are to contract the disease. Fresh air can get rid of these these aerosol particles very quickly indeed. If you open the window in a room, the breeze quickly sweeps them away. So airflow will get rid of these super light particles. So what do we do if we meet up on a bike? Well, for starters, avoid confined spaces. So that, I would suggest, means avoiding going into a cafe which is open doing takeaway service, because there will be people out there spreading the virus. You simply do not know who has it and who hasn't got it because of the asymptomatic nature and the time it takes for the virus to brew up and make you sick in the first place. And if you are going to be meeting people, 5 meters away is better than 2 meters away. You reduce the transmission rate exponentially as you increase distance. And final point I really want to make on that is that the coronavirus is not under control. Laura Koonsberg on the BBC made that statement a few nights ago, and she's completely wrong. It is temporarily constrained, no more than that. We're still having plenty of new infections. And because of the weird nature of this disease, where not everybody gets sick and some show no symptoms at all, we simply don't know how many people have it out there and who's got it. The best figures that we've got show that the curve has been flattened and lowered, but it's not been reversed. And we're certainly nowhere near 0 cases out there. There are still a lot of people who are infected with COVID-19 and are ready to pass it on to anybody else who lets their guard down. So spacing is effective because it reduces the number of people who meet each other. But the best method is to stay away from other people. Simple as that. So should you ride your motorcycle? Well, I'll repeat what MCN said on Monday. They said only you can answer this question. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And just because the regulations have been relaxed, it does not mean that the virus has been eradicated. The virus is still in the community. And the guidance in all 4 nations is to stay at home unless you have to go out. And remember, the Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland have different rules to England right now. So MCN continued. The temptation is simply return to motorcycling is overwhelming. But do we really want biking to be vilified yet again when it was, as some were shown to be slow to comply with the start of lockdown? Motorcycling is often perceived as negative by the public at large, but right now stories of couriers and volunteers delivering medical supplies and community support have placed motorcycling in the public's good books. But a sunny weekend of wailing, red line torture, open pipes and unnecessary road accidents will quickly undo all that. Most of all, we want everyone to stay safe so that when everything really is back to normal, we're all still here to enjoy it. And I will finish off on this topic with the words of a healthcare worker, James, who wrote on my Facebook page. He said, as I understand the extremely confused government gubbins, it is okay to drive for non-essential purposes. That would include motorcycles. However, as a frontline NHS worker, I should sound a cautious note. We are not out of the woods by any means. Having an accident will tie up emergency workers. How many depends on the severity of the crash, and then you have an increased chance of cross-infection as well. I've just left a well-known Facebook forum because of the revolting attitude of some members towards carers and NHS workers. Riding during the lockdown was more important to them than our lives. We've lost staff to this disease. Stay safe and stay sensible. Will I ride now? Yes, but not much and very slowly. So, yeah, if you're intending to get out there again, think about what you're going to do. You know, we are not back to normal. Right, okay, sorry, that was a long diatribe, but I feel it's absolutely vital to say all that. Okay, so on with the next story, the EU license structure. Now, we inherited that in the UK, and we're almost certain to follow it for the foreseeable future because of cross-border harmonisation with licenses. And it allows for 3 bike tests, as you probably know. The A1 Light motorcycle license, which can be taken at 17, and it allows a rider to progress to a 125. So guess what? Hardly anybody bothers, which means most 17, 18-year-olds are riding on a CBT until they're 19. Now, that age, they can take an A2 bike test, which gives you access to machines up to 47 horsepower. That will be something like a CB 500, a Ninja 300. They fit right into the bracket. Other machines have been restricted down to that figure. However convoluted the test system is for new riders, it's also been a bit of a minefield for bike trainers, with all sorts of rules about what constitutes a suitable bike for the A2 test to be taken on. Now, the bikes used for training have had to be, up till now, at least 395cc and with a power output between 25 and 35 kilowatts. When the A2 license was introduced, there wasn't actually a lot of choice. What they did allow, though, those rules, was for machines to be restricted. So as long as they didn't produce more than 94 horsepower in standard trim and had a power to weight ratio of no more than 0.2 a kilowatt, after restriction, they could be not edged down in power to the limit and then used for bike training. So what in fact happened was that many bike training schools ended up buying bikes like XJ6s, MT7s, or ER6s. Now, that means two things. There's considerable expense buying these bikes for the schools, and obviously they're not cheap. But it wasn't what a lot of trainees actually wanted to ride either, particularly women and those men who are physically smaller in stature. Women in particular have struggled with the off-road module here in the UK, and data from other countries also suggests that they've had trouble passing the off-road tests, special exercises in their own nation's version of the bike test. And it's the weight and size of the machine which is a significant problem. And that's been a complaint of mine for decades, that manufacturers build bikes to fit men, not women. And mostly they often build them to fit 6-footers too, which means that for a lot of smaller men, they really don't fit very well. Now, what happened? As soon as the license restrictions came in, and there was a guaranteed market for these A2 licensed bikes, manufacturers suddenly rushed to plug the hole in their model ranges. And the result is now we have a whole plethora of these smaller bikes, physically smaller as well as smaller in capacity, everything from 250 to 500. The Ninja 300 is a really good example. BMW's new 310. Honda rushed in there with the NC 700, one of which was A2 compliant, the CB 500s range, which are all A2 compliant, and so on. The trouble is that the test still required those bigger bikes than the little 250s and the 300s. They were still not powerful enough for the test. Or not big enough capacity-wise, I should say. So what FEMA have been doing on behalf of riders right across Europe is lobbying the EU to use those smaller capacity machines. And here's the good news. From the 25th of May, it is possible now to take the A2 license test on a 250 machine instead of a 400cc minimum. On the 5th of May, the EU published a revision to the licence directive, which allows for that lowering of minimum capacity. So that's going to be good news for all new riders who want to move up to the A2 class, particularly, as I say, to the ladies and the smaller gentlemen out there. It'll also help training schools out by allowing them to use slightly cheaper motorcycles for training as well. And that will be important after coronavirus is all sorted out. As a side note, the regulation also allows for the training schools to adopt electric motorcycles, and I haven't read that in full yet, so I'll come back to that in a future item. Okay, don't forget, you can join me every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday, 11 a.m. BST. I will be thinking about maybe reducing the number of shows I'm doing if we seem to be moving out of lockdown, but for the moment I will stick with that schedule. And don't forget, you can catch up if you miss the show. Right, so on to my last item for the day. I mentioned that it's a really good idea to learn how to twist the throttle only after we've worked on refreshing our skills with the brakes. Now, right now, obviously lots of riders are thinking about getting out there again, and there are all sorts of people popping up with some advice about taking it easy as you get back into the swing of riding. For most of us here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's been a long time since we rode. It's at least 6.5, 7 weeks, whatever it is. And there will be some of us who probably put the bikes away over the winter and actually never got them out again. I actually managed one ride and that was it. Although I'm afraid I don't ride much over the winter these days. So it's been a long break. Now, there's nothing wrong with the take it easy advice as it goes, but it's the second piece of advice we really need. The first bit is braking. Now, let me tell you a story. Many years ago, 1995, when I was training to be an instructor, I took the training course with a company called CSM, now defunct, but they did a really good and really intensive 7-day course on becoming an instructor. And almost first thing on the first day, we were taken out, given a 125 Honda, and our instructor said to us, "Right, show me how you teach me to ride it." And then picked one of us at random to actually do that out. So the guy, I think his name was Nigel, if I remember right, did a great job of explaining how the controls work, how you turn the ignition on, how you kick-started the bike into life, and said, "Right, okay, off you go and try it." So our instructor duly started the bike correctly, fired it up into gear, let the clutch out, eased the throttle open, and rode off, all completely successfully. And then our instructor, Nigel, said, "Excellent, well done. Now stop." At which point the instructor looked over his shoulder, accelerated away and said, "But you didn't tell me how," and crashed into the chain link fence on the other side of the car park. As a demo, it really stuck in my mind. It was a really good one because what it reminds us is, of course, that it's learning how to brake, which is the first thing we need to be able to do on a motorcycle, not how to go. So before we go out there and start twisting the throttle, let's renew our relationship with the brakes on the bikes. They're arguably the most important control we've got. But once out of basic training, hardly anybody actually ever spends any time working on them. They're the most ignored skill of the lot. Just go and look at what you're taught on a post-test training course. It's all about cornering, it's about overtaking, it's about better judgment of junctions and bends and hazard perception and lots of other things. But very rarely does braking come into it. Normally you just do one emergency stop, prove you can do one, and you're probably told not to use the brakes for the rest of the training course. Now, first thing to remind yourself is what technology you have or have not on the bike. If you have ABS, remind yourself how it works. If you've got link brakes, remind yourself how they works. If you haven't got either, remind yourself of that fact too. Now, standard braking, very simple, very straightforward exercise. We use both brakes to stop. Front brake is the straight line stopper, but using both brakes together makes for a better, smoother, less nose down, more stable stop. A lot of people talk about 75-25 rule with 75% of the braking done on the front, 25 on the rear. I have never, ever known how anybody judges 75 and 25 on a bike. I can't do it. I can't tell you how to do it. All I can say is the front brake does more work than the rear. But try this at home. Take your bike out to a reasonably well surfaced, reasonably flat, preferably a car park or a deserted straight with the road, and practice. Start gently. Start very low speed. Practice with the front brake only, practice with the rear brake only, and then go to both brakes together. I really do suggest that you only do this at about 20 or 25 miles an hour, no faster than that. Start with mild application of the brakes, build up pressure over half a dozen stops until you can feel what's happening. So rather than trying to get maximum braking out of the bike, what we're aiming for here is consistency and smoothness. Feel how the bike responds under different pressures on both brakes. And another thing to check here is your riding posture, something I've talked about regularly. Make sure that you are locked into the tank with your knees, that you are taking the deceleration force via your spine and not by leaning on the bars with your arms. Now, do that and then move on to the next exercise. This time it's the rear brake. Now, the rear brake is really useful in a lot of situations. We tend to think of it as a slow control brake, but it does more than that. It also helps on slippery surfaces if you use rear brake, and it's a really good way of controlling our speed downhill. We don't necessarily brake to slower speeds with the rear, but we do use it to control speed down a hill. So try some gentle braking just using the rear brake only. Again, try riding along and stopping just using the rear brake from slow speed. Then try riding at a brisk walking pace and moving the speed up and down bit by bit, and use the rear brake to do that, not the throttle. Now, third exercise. Try braking with both brakes normally, as we've said, but add an extra twist. While the bike is still moving at a brisk walking pace, so the speed is coming down, but you are still moving, ease off the front brake. Let that front brake out smoothly so that the forks can rebound. The forks can come back to their natural position, and just finish off with the rear brake only. Don't brake harder with the rear brake, just maintain the same pressure. And what you'll find is the bike glides to a nice level halt. Now that helps if you're riding a heavy bike, a tall bike, and it helps if you're riding two up with a passenger, which I suspect a lot of you may well be doing over the next few days. So it also helps when you're braking to a stop in a bend. Now, all the rules say you shouldn't brake to a stop in a bend, but if you are approaching the end of a side turning and that junction curves away around the corner, how are you going to avoid doing that? You may have to brake to a halt in a bend, and that's the way to do it. Do most of the braking with the front brake, but then ease off the front and just finish off with the rear on its own. Here's another variation. Slow down using both brakes together, then ease off the front, hold the bike at a slow walking pace for 5 meters, say, before re-engaging the drive and accelerating away. That's the kind of skill that's really useful coming up to a junction where you are not going to stop. So giveaway junction where you've got a good view left and right, you can see it's clear, but you need that time at the end of the junction to both ways. That's how you do it, by getting the rear brake on, controlling the speed with the rear brake before pulling away again. And again, try doing a practice look. Use posture, knees against the tank, stiff back, keeps the weight off the arms, means you can turn the head, look both ways without yanking the bars one way or the other. And last but not least, some hard braking. The emergency stop has been part of the bike test for decades. We've been training people to do emergency stops for 40 odd years. And hardly anybody ever goes back out there and does a practice emergency stop after they've passed their test. Now, don't forget that there will be rusty drivers out there too. And some of those will be making mistakes. So do get some firm braking in. Again, a well-surfaced, reasonably flat, empty car park or a deserted bit of straight road is the place to go. Don't go too fast. Again, I suggest 25 to 30 miles an hour maximum for this exercise. Start gently, but build up the pressure until you are getting close to maximum braking force. Check your posture, check for consistency. Don't snatch the brakes on. Even if you've got ABS, which will save you from a lockup, it will still destabilize the bike. Nice progressive squeeze of the brakes. Remember the emergency stop technique is get the bike upright, get the throttle closed, get the front brake on gently, get the rear brake on gently. That's your fourth point. Get the progressive squeeze on the front that brings the speed down nice and briskly. And then finally, just before you stall, as you put your foot down, that's when the clutch should come in. But if you don't do that and it stalls, don't worry about it too much. You can always restart. And finally, of course, if you pull the clutch in a bit early, again, you will lose the ability to stop the rear wheel locking up because you haven't got the engine driving it. It will take you a little bit longer to stop. But don't fret about it too much. If you do this on the road, make sure that road is deserted, and that means looking in your mirrors before you do it. Okay, we used to do a lot of emergency stop practice on the road in the days before the Module 1 test, and that was always something that riders had to check very carefully before doing an emergency stop. Right, okay. That's pretty much it for today's show. I will put these tips up on braking in written form so that you can revisit them, and they'll be going up on my Coffee page. Now, if you want more help in improving your riding over the next few weeks, more and more content is going up over there. Some of it will be free, some of it's for supporters, and some of it's for subscribers. Now, supporters, That's basically anybody who makes a contribution from as little as £3. That will give you 30 days access to all the supported content over there. At the moment, there are 100 articles that I wrote for Facebook in 2014 over there, which you can access if you're a supporter. If you're a subscriber, you can become a subscriber again for as little as £3, but now it's a monthly payment. As long as you subscribe, then you get access to more content. You get the supporter content, but you'll also be able to access my online training content, specifically at the moment, the Performance Bends course. By following the e-course, you'll get the same kind of knowledge about cornering as I would deliver to you on a face-to-face course. The only difference is that you'll have to go and ride using that knowledge on your own for the time being. And once again, I'm putting more content up there on an almost a daily basis. So you're more than welcome to go over there and have a look at it. It won't cost you an arm and a leg. And as I say, there is more content going up all the time. Well, that's it for today. We're out of time. I've said everything I want to say. The main thing is do be safe out there. If you do decide to go and ride out on your bike, as I say, it's up to you, but do think what you're doing out there. Do be careful. I'll be back with more news, views and tips on Friday. On Monday, don't forget, we'll be running the second part of our suspension talk with Dave Moss, who's the riding expert from California. My regular posts are still going up on Facebook, and hopefully we'll catch you next time on Friday. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.